Okay, I've got a slide out cylinder that's gone bad on my 2018 3400 RS Alpine. Broke camp the other day and noticed that I had a little pool of hydraulic fluid on the concrete underneath that side of the camper, on the driver's side of the camper, and went over to inspect it. Everything worked fine. I was able to get everything retracted and home. It was just a small little bit, but obviously had to see what was going on with it. So I opened up the bottom, which I'm going to show you here in a minute, and discovered I had a bad so the items we're going to need to repair this are a new cylinder in this box right here. Unlike the level up cylinders, which can be rebuilt, these cylinders can't be rebuilt because the ends are crimped on. Chuck Steed helped me understand that, which was very helpful. And I'm going to show you how I cut into the bottom rather than trying to take the coroplast down all the way, because just like Chuck recently had to do, it's tucked into the rear cap. There's a whole bunch of work that would go into that. So I'm going to put it back together with this waterproof Gorilla tape. It's actually called patch and seal tape. It's pretty expensive actually. It's like $15 for a 10-foot roll, but it's good stuff. The other thing I'm going to need is an 1 1/8" wrench, because that's the size of the nuts that are on the cylinder, and some alcohol to clean the coroplast when I'm done and before I put the tape on, and a few other little things. Since I'm only working on one of the slides, my Alpine has 3 slides, 2 mains and then a electric Schwintek actuated bedroom slide, but that's nothing to do with what I'm doing today. But I don't need to move around in both slides. That one's fine so far. So I'm going to come into my hydraulics bay here, and I'm going to close the valve. I have marked these for myself, living room and kitchen, just so I can remember it. From the factory it says main and imposing, but that really never meant anything. And I'm going to close this valve to the living room slide, which is what I call it, so that when I do actuate the hydraulic pump, only the kitchen slide's going to move, and that's the one I'm working on. So that's what I'm doing here. Okay, we're underneath now of the Alpine, and I have already cut into this. I'll show you how I did it. I cut into it the other day to inspect it, to figure out, because the first thing you have to do is figure out what is leaking. Is it a bad cylinder? Is it a loose fitting? Is it a hydraulic hose with a hole in it, a chafe, that has developed a leak? That's what you got to figure out. Again, Chuck was helpful with me the other day. He helped me troubleshoot it and figure out how, or figure out which one of these was the culprit. And in my case, it is the cylinder, which I'm going to show you here in a second. So it was leaking past its internal, one of its internal seals. And as I said earlier, unfortunately, that one's not rebuildable. I did get one on Amazon for right around $200, and it came in a couple days. So not too bad, but I'm going to open this now and show you what's inside. All right, I ended up having to make a wider opening than I originally had cut to get to the back side of the cylinder up here. So I had to cut further back, and in order to fold that and out of the way, I ended up having to take these 2 junction blocks off. It's very easy to do because of the way they put these things together, which isn't saying much, but each one of these little blocks of scrap wood is just held on by one of these self-tapping screws that goes through the bottom of the coroplast and into the block, and that's all that's there. So with that out, disconnected, I can now sweep this stuff to the side, get it out of the way. It's already got fluid on it from the leak, so I'm going to have to clean that up when I'm done. But now that enables me to get this thing pulled back, and you can see that that's a mess. If you look right here, you can see the fluid dripping out. It's actually dripping up and hitting the ground right there. That's the fluid. Will, like any fluid, it's going to find a low spot, and it has collected in the center of the coroplast belly. There's a little pool of it in there, and I'm hoping that that's all coming from the cylinder. I do know the cylinder leaks, so I'm going to go with the assumption that that's where it's coming from. I'll get it cleaned up and go from there. As you'll see in the Lippert video, sorry about the sun. As you'll see in the Lippert video, after you, when you're at the stage where you're taking this nylon lock nut off, you're using a 1 1/8 inch wrench, which actually seems a little loose on mine. It might be a little smaller, but it's working. But the one thing they don't say to do, and I recommend highly, is hit this area right here with a little bit of that PB blaster penetrating fluid, because there will be a little bit of surface rust on this, and this is already a tough bolt to move because it's a nylon lock nut, and you don't have a lot of throw in here for your wrench, or at least I don't in mine. And so far that's been a bit of a tough bit of work, because there's a lot. I've already had it off. I just wanted to show you, but hit that with some PB blaster and it will make this nut come off a lot easier for sure. Okay, so the rod has been disconnected, the piston, and have retracted it per the instructions on the Lippert video. But I wanted to show you, not sure if you can see it in the video, but there is, when I retracted it, there's fluid just pouring out beneath this where the piston comes in and out. So once again, just reconfirming the leak. In the Lippert video that shows you how to remove this hydraulic cylinder, which is a really good video, with the exception of that they're doing it on a nice clean bench, and it's basically just an open frame. There's no slide out or anything attached to it, so it's about like the best case scenario. I found a couple of things that you'll want to probably know ahead of time if you attempt this, and you may run into them depending on your particular model. One of the first things was that they show in the video this fitting being really easy to take off. In fact, in the video, the fitting isn't a T like that. It's just a single connection, which depending on what cylinder you have on the rig that you're working on, you may have that, but these are daisy chained together essentially. So this one is not the end of the line, so it's continuing on to something else. The problem with it is there wasn't enough clearance in that hole right there to actually turn this fitting. I could get the hoses off of it. That was pretty easy to do, and I did that. But then to remove the cylinder, you do have to get that T off, or the fitting if it's a single. In my case anyway, it would not clear that hole, even with the cylinder being loose at both ends. It wouldn't go that way enough for me to get the rear of the cylinder out of the mounting bracket. So what I had to do was I did have to loosen both ends up, and then once I did that, I could maneuver it around enough to get the fitting loose, and then just by hand I was able to get it out. And then once it's out, it was pretty easy to do. But there just isn't enough forward room against this bulkhead to get that out of there. And this is actually not, this is the way it was from the factory. There's not a lot of the mounting stud sticking through the other side, unlike this one, which goes to the other opposing slide. You can see there's a lot of exposed threaded rod there. That would be even harder to get out in that same circumstance, but I haven't looked at the other end to see what it looks like. But in any case, you may have to adapt and overcome. That's all I'm trying to say. The video that Lippert has is great, but it's a best case scenario video. In reality, you may run into some small roadblocks, but it's just simple mechanical stuff. You should be able to get around it. The hydraulic fluid that was leaking in here made a huge mess. So I got myself a little concoction of Dawn dishwashing detergent and water, and just gonna try to get this in as many places as I can. Let it sit, get these wires And then I'm gonna wipe most of it out and hit it with the spray nozzle too, just to try to get as much of this stuff. Literally goes everywhere. You can see up here where I cut back to, there's still a little puddle of hydraulic fluid where it's shiny back there, so I got to reach back there and get that. That's where the low spot in the coroplast was. So it ran back all the way from the driver's side frame rail back to that center spot in the camper, because that's what liquid does. It looks for a low spot and it will find it. Not easy to get up in here, so I got myself an old boat brush, soft bristled boat brush here. I don't use much anymore, and I'm just going to use that to kind of work the dishwashing detergent around. It's really hard to reach up in here without cutting further, and I don't want to do that. So I'm just going to do the best I can to get the rest of this just loosened up a little bit. The wire's pretty much all moved, so just don't, be careful you don't pull or pinch anything. Besides just making this cleaner, which is not a bad thing by itself, the other real reason you're going to want to try to clean this up is if you have a leak in the future. If you've got stuff sitting up here and it pretty much won't evaporate, it's going to sit up here for a long time. It's not exposed to the sun or anything, and unless it leaks out to the ground, it's going to be in here for a while. So if you have a leak in the future, it's going to be hard to figure out where it's coming from. So I think it's worth the time to clean this mess up. When I had the original problem, one of the first hurdles was just figuring out where the leak was coming from. So starting from a clean slate is, in my opinion, the way to go. But I got everything else pretty cleaned up. This is all good now. It's mostly the hydraulic fluid is really difficult to get off of everything. It took a couple of different tries to get through all of it, and the wires that are hanging down, which I'm going to put back. I know this looks like a lot, but it's really, don't let it scare you. It's not a big deal. You're just going to push all the stuff back up in here. These junction blocks, which we talked about earlier, I had to clean those up too because they had hydraulic fluid all over them. Just be careful with those. That is live power there. Those are 120, so it's AC power, not your DC side. And you can tell that by the kind of wire right here. This is Romex. This is like the stuff you'll find in your house. So if you see that anywhere, you've got 110 power. Sorry, 120. I don't call it 110 anymore. So just be careful with that. And if you're going to get it wet or anything, make sure you disconnect the power from your camper. But we're almost ready to put her back together. I just got to reach up in there and clean out that one last little area. I put a light under here so you can get a better look at what's going on. So if you have never looked underneath these before, it's a bit of a mess. Really no reason other than how fast they put these together for this to look like this. They could definitely make it look a little better, but so I've just finished cleaning this up and I'm waiting for it to dry. I don't want to button it up until it's mainly dried up. I'm just letting it air dry. Probably gonna give it an hour or so. I don't want to button it up. The water will eventually evaporate out of here, but while we're in here, I wanted to show you. Now again, this is a 3400 RS model, so your model could be different, but you'll have a very similar setup. Sooner, either something exactly like this or very similar. So this is the onboard freshwater holding tank, and for mine it's in the rear. It's past the axles, all the way to the back of the camper, which is an interesting place. I typically don't tow with a lot of water, just enough to flush the toilet and wash hands on the way. We like to use our own bathroom on the road. But if you ever have a problem, this is what it's going to look like. That's the low point of the tank, and right below the bulkhead, sometimes we see the question get asked, what is this guy right here? And that's your low point drain. If you want to drain the freshwater tank, that's the way to do it. It's hanging out from beneath it, and that's what it looks like on the inside. Also, this is another thing that sometimes causes some questions. This is your vent hose right here. Let's see if I can get a better shot of it. Not easy to get underneath here. The big white corrugated hook, that's your vent hose, and that goes out and over the side of the camper. So if you overfill the tank and you see water coming out of the side of it, the side of your camper, it's coming out of that hose.
Now you can see the way mine's plumbed. It actually goes low and then out, and that's actually creating a siphon situation. So when I have water filled in mine, sometimes if I turn a corner or something like that, it can actually create a siphon, and it will siphon a fair amount of water out of that. The way to fix that is to raise the bottom of that hose above the outlet point on the tank, so it's plumbed that way from the factory. A lot of them are. It's not a big deal, but if you want to stop that siphon, then raise that low point of that hose where that wire strap's going around it. I got everything done, and I'm going to test it now. Make sure if you ever do this, and I'm operating the slide with my phone via the in-command system, so I'm laying underneath it. Had a little incident the other day when I was doing this, and I forgot that my refrigerator doors were open, because we leave them like that when it's stored, and one of the doors hit the island, and I did a little bit of damage to the door, but nothing bad. I was able to repair it, but I got lucky. I know better than that, so if you're ever moving these things, I very rarely use the phone app to move my slides. I prefer to be inside where I can see what's going on. But in this case, I was underneath it doing work, and I wanted to be able to see these slides move, and it caught me. So lesson learned. Anyways, it's going to test it now. Yes. Okay, retract that in real good. Nice and smooth. No leaks so far, thankfully. I wouldn't expect to see any. This is a good time to double check all your connections. Make sure you've got these. These are compression fittings. Make sure that they're snugged up real good. And I'll cycle that a couple of times before I finally button it all up. But real happy with it. No leaks. Everything in here is looking good. And if you are ever going to cycle, if you're going to run these slides back and forth, a tip that Chuck gave me, be careful about overheating the hydraulic pump. After about 3 or 4 cycles, you should definitely let it cool off there. Okay, my repair is complete. It's dry. All the hydraulic fluid that I can see is out. The wires are all cleaned. The junction blocks are clean, and I'm going to put it back together now. So a couple things that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to clean these edges really good, because we're going to reseal this. I'm using, and this is what Chuck used to do his, and he liked the results, so I'm going to go for it too. This is the Gorilla brand waterproof patch and seal tape. They're pretty proud of this stuff. It was about 14 or 15 bucks for a 10-foot roll of it. But that should give me enough to do this, because I only need to seal the 2 sides. The back is still attached, and the front is going to be attached back with some self-tapping screws. I'm going to get rid of the little rivet nails. So I'm going to use some alcohol and some paper towels to get this really clean, so that the Gorilla tape is able to stick. All right, final stages here. I'm going to button this thing up, try to film for you and do this with one hand. That'll be fun. I'm going to use the existing self-tapping metal screw that was holding up part of this. The rest of this was held up by these nail rivets, which I'm going to show you, but at least by having the one in here, I can get it where it needs to go, and then I can tuck the rest of the stuff in. So basically just gonna get this thing back up in the existing hole for now, just using a small ratchet here. I just want to get it threaded so it'll hold it. I'm not gonna go any further than that, because I've got some wire management to do here, and the easiest way to do it, I think, is just to get that up there, and then you can tuck the stuff in.
So these are the, and honestly I'm not sure, somebody who sees this may know what the exact term for these things are. They're, looks like they're kind of like a rivet, but they have like a nail end, and there is a hex head that I was able to get a small socket on to turn it. Obviously there's no thread, so it won't screw out, but turning it did help me get them out. I didn't have to drill them out, which is what I was worried about having to do. So putting a socket head on that and spinning them around in the frame, and then there was a washer on this, of course, and I got a screwdriver underneath the washer and just kind of pried on it, and eventually I could get a pair of vice grips on it and pull it all the way out. So it came out pretty easy. It's a smooth shank thing, but that's what all these are on mine. They're all the way down, and I'm not replacing them. I'm putting stainless steel self-tappers in it to button this thing up. Okay, that side's buttoned up. Stainless steel self-tapping screw. The frame's pretty thick there, but it goes through pretty good if you got a decent drill. And I'm gonna put a couple of those along the edge, and then we're gonna come over here and we're gonna tape this up. All right, she's all buttoned up. Everything's put back together. The wires are back in. I've got a couple of new pieces of stainless steel hardware and some of the original stuff that was here. I went a little small with the size of the stainless. I would go up one. I think those are your wrist twisting those off when they get drilled into the iron above it, so the steel above it. So go with a little bit beefier screw. I forgot what number that is, but go with something like the original one has on it. It's the next size up. Anyways, the Gorilla tape is amazing. Definitely read the instructions on it. I did, and I'm glad I did, because it tells you right off the bat that this is not, you cannot reposition it once you apply it, and they're not kidding. This is some serious tape. I doubled it up on this side because I had an extra piece left, and there was a little bit more stress on the underbelly here. So I wanted to make sure that it had a good reinforcement on it, but I don't think that stuff's going anywhere, and there certainly isn't going to be any water getting in from there. You get more water in from the edges up here than you would from this any day. So I'm very happy with it. I'm glad Chuck recommended that solution, the whole solution, which is instead of taking this whole thing off, cutting an access panel, which has worked out really well for me, and glad it's done. I'm keeping my fingers crossed I don't have to get up in there anytime soon. The job was it's dirty, uncomfortable, and cramped, but definitely doable, and I can't even imagine how much money I just saved. So, and even if you don't ever think you're going to take on something like this, at least if you watch this video, you'll have an idea of what goes on, so that you don't get taken for a ride at the dealership or some guy fixing it. It's not rocket science in here. It's just a matter of getting in here and getting dirty. I took my time. It took me several hours to do it, over a couple of days, because it was just real hot here in Florida and I wasn't interested in rushing the job. I have some ProFlex adhesive coming. This little piece of chloroplast broke out when I took the pan down in the first place. No big deal. I'm just going to seal it up with some more of this goop right here. I'll put a link to the stuff I used in the video. I got this information, like so many other things, from Chuck. So I'll be sealing this up as soon as I get the stuff in the mail. But other than that, I'm very happy with it, and just keeping my fingers crossed I don't have to get up in here and replace that again anytime soon. But if I do, at least I know how to do it. One last little thing I wanted to show you what I did. In the low point, in the bottom of the chloroplast in the back, I may consider doing this up front as well. I went ahead and drilled a 1/4 inch hole very carefully to make sure you don't hit anything on, because there's wires and stuff laying all over the other side of this. I did it while I could still see inside. I don't recommend blindly drilling through this at all. But the reason I put this here is twofold. One, this stuff's not sealed. I mean, there are gaps all along the frame. It's not like it's airtight. It's not bug tight. It's not watertight. So really wasn't worried about the integrity of that so much. The reason I did this is because had I had a drain here, I would have discovered this leak a long time ago, I think, because by the time I got to it, there was a puddle right here on the other side of this of hydraulic fluid.
I'm routinely underneath this thing. I'm looking around. I check the air pressure on my spare tire often, so I'm underneath here anyway, and I guarantee you I would have seen hydraulic fluid leaking out of that a long time ago, and it would have made this repair easier probably because I would have caught it earlier. By the time I caught it, the fluid was everywhere. But even if it didn't make it easier, at least I would have known about it right away. I don't know how many trips I took this rig on with it leaking, and if you have a hydraulic failure, you've got a situation on your hands. So I'm gonna leave that here. I could always put a little piece of duct tape over it if I wanted to seal it up, and then pull it down if I wanted to see if there was anything there. But I'm gonna probably do that elsewhere around the camper, just so I know if there's anything collecting up in there.